The sky tore open like skin under a knife. Accelerator stood in the ruins of what had been a city block 3 seconds ago. His reflection gone, his wings unfolding behind him in shapes that should not exist. Black, writhing, wrong. They moved like living things, like the space around them was something they could claw through, and the vectors screaming through his skull told him he was dying, burning, becoming something else entirely. Corazon laughed somewhere in the smoke. He could not see her, did not need to. The vectors painted her location in his mind like a three-dimensional map drawn in blood and mathematics. She was everywhere and nowhere, phasing between layers of reality he could barely perceive, even now, even with his black wings tearing holes in the world just by existing. His wings lashed out. The buildings to his left collapsed inward, crushed by forces that had no name in any physics textbook. The air itself seemed to scream, "You are breaking, little monster!" Corazon's voice came from every direction at once, shattering like glass. "Do you even know what you are becoming?" He did not answer. Could not. The language that wanted to spill from his mouth was not Japanese, not English, not anything human. It was older, sharper. It cut the inside of his throat just thinking it. The vectors told him she was moving, told him she was preparing something, told him the space between dimensions was growing thinner like fabric stretched too tight. His black wings spread wider and the world bent. Corazon struck first. Reality folded. The phase crack opened not with sound, but with absence, a silence so profound it swallowed thought itself. Accelerator saw it for a fraction of a second, a wound in the world, thin as a razor's edge, and then the vectors around him went mad. His wings tried to compensate, tried to anchor him, tried to keep him in this universe. They failed. The crack was not a doorway, it was a mouth. And on the other side, something vast and hungry and utterly alien sensed him. The warp. It tasted him. Tasted something that was not matter, not spirit, not anything. It had consumed in 10,000 years of screaming madness. Something with the essence of an angel twisted wrong. Something that should not exist in any layer of reality. And it pulled. Accelerator's scream died in his throat as the universe inverted. His black wings folded around him instinctively, a cocoon of impossible force, and then he was falling through colors that had no names and spaces that had no dimensions, and the vectors in his head fractured into a million shrieking equations that all ended in zero. Darkness, then light, then neither. The black ship designated 999 Moors hung in the void like a cathedral built from nightmares and iron. Its hull was black, but not the black of absence. The black of wrong. The black of something that had seen too much and could no longer remember what hope looked like. On the bridge, servitors twitched in their stations, their augmetic eyes processing data streams that would drive an unmodified human mad within seconds. Inquisitor Myrdan stood before the main viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of surgical scars and ancient hatred. The sensors screamed. Anomaly detected. The servitor's voice was flat, mechanical, dead. Coordinates 037. Energy signature unknown. Classification impossible. Myrdan's eyes narrowed. 40 years of hunting witches and demons and things that wore human skin had taught him to recognize the impossible when it announced itself. Visual, he said. The screen flickered, enhanced, magnified. Black wings, twisting in the void like they were made of ink and violence. Around them, space itself seemed to ripple, to bend, to break in ways that violated every law of physics the Mechanicus had ever catalogued. And beneath the wings, a figure. Pale, small, human-shaped. The energy readings made no sense, no warp signature, no psycher resonance, nothing demonic, but also nothing material, nothing that obeyed the fundamental forces that held the universe together. Phase energy, the lead tech priest's voice crackled through the vox. Linguistic patterns detected. Analysis suggests lingua angelica, but corrupted, fragmented. Mirrodin's jaw tightened. Angels, or something that had once been close enough to touch them. "Bring it in," he said. His voice was cold clinical. "Alive. Deploy the phase iron containment field. I want it in a cell before it regains consciousness." The servitors moved like clockwork. The ship's tractor beams, ancient technology salvaged from the Dark Age and sanctified in blood, locked onto the anomaly. Drew it in. The black wings thrashed once, twice, then folded inward as unconsciousness finally claimed their master. Accelerator woke in a cage. Not a cell. A cage. The walls were not metal. They were something older. Something that hummed with a frequency that made his teeth ache and his vectors stutter and fail. Phase iron. He did not know the name, but his ability understood instinctively that this material existed in multiple dimensions at once, that trying to manipulate it was like trying to grab smoke. 80% of his reflection was gone. The remaining 20% was barely holding his consciousness together. He sat up slowly. His body hurt. Not injured, not damaged, just wrong. Like every cell was vibrating at a frequency slightly out of sync with reality. The cage was small, 3 meters by 3 meters, no windows. One door seamless, impossible to see where it joined the walls. The only light came from strips embedded in the ceiling, cold and white and sterile. He could hear machinery beyond the walls, the thrum of engines, the hiss of atmospheric recyclers, the distant screaming of something that might have been human once. And then he heard the child, small, ragged breathing, fear, pain. His head turned before his conscious mind caught up. The vectors weak and stuttering as they were painted the picture anyway. Another cell, adjacent to his. And inside it, a girl no older than 10 strapped to a machine that was slowly, methodically draining something from her skull. A soul siphon rig. He did not know that name either. Did not need to. The vectors told him what it was doing, told him how it worked, told him that in approximately 47 minutes, there would not be enough of her mind left to qualify as human. Something in his chest went very cold. His black wings had not manifested, were not manifesting, could not manifest in this cage, not with the phase iron suppressing 80% of his ability, but the 20% that remained. That was still more than most things in this universe could survive. The trigger was not conscious, not intentional. The girl whimpered a sound so small and broken, it should not have reached him through the walls. But the vectors carried it anyway. Amplified, it made it the only thing in the world that mattered. Last Order's face flashed through his mind. Misaka, 132. All the sisters he had killed, all the ones he had failed to save, all the blood on his hands that would never wash off, no matter how many he protected now. The berserk state did not announce itself. It simply was. His eyes went flat, empty. The vectors around him condensed into a point so dense that reality began to crack. The phase iron held. and then it shattered. Not broke, shattered. Molecular bonds unraveling as the vectors forced their way through dimensions the material was never meant to withstand. The cage walls peeled back like paper screeching metal at impossible angles. The door opened. Guards poured in, bolters raised. Enhanced reflexes, power armor, decades of training. 1 second. That was how long they lasted. The bolter rounds launched. The vectors met them halfway, reversed every trajectory. Every shot that should have punched through his skull instead found the throat of the man who fired it. The walls around him bent, twisted, compressed. A Space Marine's power armor was designed to withstand anti-tank weaponry. It was not designed to withstand its own mass being compressed into a sphere the size of a fist. Blood misted the air. Accelerator walked through it without blinking. His vectors reached ahead of him, feeling through the ship's structure like fingers through water. Found the girl. Found the machine eating her mind. Found the cables. He pressed his hand against the wall. The metal shrieked, buckled. The entire section of corridor ahead of him collapsed inward, crushed by forces that made no sense, that should not exist. That the ship's sensors could not even properly measure because they violated the fundamental assumptions the Mechanicus used to build their instruments. He found the door, touched it. It ceased to be a door. It became a cloud of iron particles suspended in the air, and then the vectors brushed them aside like dust. The girl was there, still strapped in, still breathing, barely. The soul siphon rig sparked and screamed as he approached. The machine could sense something wrong, something impossible, something that its ancient programming had no protocols for. Accelerator touched it. Every circuit fried simultaneously. The girl slumped forward, unconscious but alive. He caught her before she hit the floor. She weighed nothing. Felt like paper. Her pulse was thready and weak, but there. Behind him, the ship's alarms finally started screaming. Dozens of guards converged. Inquisition, soldiers, servitors. They poured into the corridor from every direction, weapons raised prayers on their lips. The vectors painted their trajectories in his mind, showed him where they would be in 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10. He did not wait for them to arrive. The floor beneath his feet buckled. The ceiling above cracked. The walls to either side compressed inward with a sound like a god's scream. The entire section of the ship folded, collapsed, imploded around him, while leaving a perfect sphere of empty space where he stood. The girl cradled against his chest. The black ship's hull could withstand bombardment from orbit. It was not designed for internal assault from something that could manipulate the fundamental forces holding its atoms together. Pressure loss. Emergency bulkheads slamming shut. The roar of atmosphere venting into the void. And above it all, the sound of something vast and ancient, beginning to die. The ship was falling. Not in space. There was no down in space. But it was falling anyway, drawn toward the massive hive world below by gravity and fate and the weight of its own broken mass. Accelerator did not run, did not need to. The vectors simply cleared a path, and he walked through the screaming chaos as the black ship 999 Moors tore itself apart around him. An escape pod. Emergency airlock. He punched through the door, placed the girl inside, climbed in after her. His hand found the launch button more through vector sense than sight. The world inverted. G-forces that should have liquefied human flesh slammed into them. The vectors caught it all, redirected it, turned it into nothing. Below, the black ship struck the upper atmosphere of the hive world and began to burn. A trail of fire 100 kilometers long. Accelerator watched through the pod's tiny viewport as the cathedral of iron and nightmares came apart like a flower made of shrapnel. Somewhere inside, Inquisitor Myrdan was screaming orders that no one could hear anymore. The escape pod's retro thrusters fired, slowed their descent from instant death to merely catastrophic. The hive world rushed up to meet them, a landscape of rust and smoke and 10 billion lives packed into cities that stretched from bedrock to cloud layer. They hit. The impact should have killed them. The vectors caught it, absorbed it, bled it off into the ground as superheated plasma that melted the rockcrete for 30 meters in every direction. The pod's door blew open. Accelerator stepped out, the girl still unconscious in his arms, and looked up at the sky. Above the black ship's wreckage was still falling, burning, dying. Pieces the size of hab blocks tumbled through the clouds, trailing fire. He watched it for a moment. His face was empty. His eyes were flat. His black wings, invisible now, still coiled around his shoulders like living shadows. Then he turned and walked into the darkness of Hive L42, leaving behind nothing but melted stone and a crater that would puzzle the locals for years to come. Behind him, the burning sky painted everything the color of blood. The air tasted like rust and death. Accelerator stood at the edge of the crater, the girl still unconscious against his chest, and looked out at the world he had fallen into. Hive L42. The name meant nothing to him. Would have meant nothing even if someone had explained it. But the vectors painted the picture anyway, told him everything he needed to know about this place in the language of forces and masses and structural integrity that was seconds from catastrophic failure. The buildings rose like tombstones, hundreds of meters tall, thousands, stacked on top of each other in layers that made no architectural sense, held together by girders and prayers and the weight of 10 billion people who had nowhere else to go. Metal, rust, concrete that had been poured centuries ago and left to crack and bleed orange stains down walls that had never seen sunlight. The smell was worse than the taste. Human waste, chemical runoff, the sweet rot stench of bodies that had been left in alleys because no one cared enough to move them. And underneath it all, the acrid burn of promethium exhaust, the city's lungs coughing black smoke into air that was already more poison than oxygen. The girl stirred, made a small sound. Her eyes fluttered but did not open. Accelerator looked down at her. His face was empty, his expression flat. The 20% of his calculation ability that remained functional told him she was stable, told him her vitals were strengthening, told him she would live. The 80% that was gone told him nothing, left only the vectors and the instinct and the cold knowledge that something in this city was very, very wrong. He started walking. The lower levels of the hive were a maze. Corridors that twisted back on themselves. Stairwells that went down forever. Passages so narrow 2 people could not walk side by side. The walls wept moisture that was not water, left trails of black mold spreading like infection through concrete that crumbled when he brushed against it. People lived here. He could sense them through the vectors. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Packed into spaces meant for hundreds. Their heartbeats created a rhythm, a pulse, the breathing of something vast and sick and dying by degrees. Most stayed out of sight. He caught glimpses, shadows moving in doorways, eyes watching from cracks in walls, faces pale and hollow skin stretched tight over bones that had never known enough food. Children with distended bellies, adults with augmetic replacements so crude they leaked oil and pus where metal met flesh. No one approached him. Perhaps it was the way he walked. Not hurried, not slow, just forward. like gravity had given up trying to pull him down. Perhaps it was the girl in his arms, her breathing soft against his chest. Or perhaps it was something else. Something they could sense, but not name. The vectors coiling around him like invisible smoke. The air that moved wrong when he passed. The way reflections in puddles showed something that was not quite his shape. He descended deeper. The light grew dimmer. Strips of luminescent fungus growing in cracks. Flickering electro sconces that buzzed and sparked and died. Fires burning in metal drums, shadows dancing on walls covered in graffiti that looked more like prayers than words. A checkpoint appeared ahead. 2 guards in armor that had been patched so many times the original color was impossible to determine. Laser guns held loose, faces bored. They straightened when they saw him approaching. One raised a hand, opened his mouth to speak. The vectors showed Accelerator the trajectory of the guard's arm, showed him where the laser gun would point in 0.7 seconds, showed him the exact angle of the finger moving toward the trigger. His black wings did not manifest, did not need to. The calculation was simple. The guard's arm moved, the laser gun swung up, and then both stopped as every vector of force in the man's shoulder joint reversed direction simultaneously. The sound was like green wood snapping. The guard screamed, collapsed. His weapon clattered to the ground. The second guard stared, processed, decided. The laser gun came up faster, finger already on the trigger, training overriding fear. The shot fired. A line of superheated light that should have burned through Accelerator's skull and kept going until it hit the wall behind him. It did not. The beam touched the invisible field of vectors around him and bent. 90 degrees, straight down. The last bolt carved a smoking line through the rockcrete floor and disappeared into darkness. The guard's eyes went wide. Accelerator walked past him, did not look back. The vectors told him the man was not moving, was not breathing, was locked in place by the simple understanding that he had just witnessed something that could not exist. Behind them, the first guard was still screaming. The sound echoed down the corridor, bounced off walls, faded into the constant background noise of the hive. Machinery. Voices. The drip of something wet in the darkness. The girl's breathing changed, quickened. Her eyes opened, unfocused, glazed with the remnants of whatever drugs the soul siphon rig had pumped into her veins. She looked up at him, blinked. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Accelerator stopped, looked down at her. His expression did not change. Could not. The berserk state had not left, had merely settled. Gone quiet, like a predator that had eaten and was now simply waiting. The girl's eyes focused, found his face, and for a moment something passed between them that was not quite recognition, more like understanding, the kind that came from having seen the same darkness from different angles. She did not scream, did not struggle, just stared at him with eyes too old for her face, and waited. He lowered her to the ground, gently. She swayed but stayed upright. Her legs trembled. She was barefoot, dressed in a gray shift that was more holes than fabric. There were marks on her wrists where the restraints had bitten deep. Bruises, scars, the kind that told stories no child should have. They stood there in the corridor while the wounded guard's screams finally faded into sobbing. A door opened nearby. A woman appeared, middle-aged face, like leather eyes hard. She looked at the guard, at Accelerator, at the girl. She said nothing, stepped back inside. The door closed. Accelerator turned and kept walking. After 3 steps, he heard the girl following. Small footsteps, uneven. struggling to keep pace. He did not slow down, did not need to. The vectors painted her position in his mind, showed him when she stumbled, when she caught herself, when she fell too far behind. At those moments, his pace would adjust. Just enough, just barely. So she could catch up without realizing he was making it easier. They moved deeper into the hive. The architecture changed, became older, stranger. Walls that curved instead of meeting at right angles. Doorways sized for things that were not quite human proportions. Symbols carved into metal that had been here when the Imperium was still young. This was the underbelly. The foundation. The part of the city that no one remembered building and everyone tried to forget. A sound reached them. Voices. Multiple. Raised in anger or fear or both. Accelerator stopped at a corner. The vectors showed him what was happening before he looked. A plaza. If the word could apply to a space that was more whole than room. 50 meters across, ringed by balconies and broken windows. In the center, a group of people, 20, 30, pressed together. Some were children, most were not. Guards surrounded them. Real guards this time, not the bored checkpoint sentries. These wore actual armor, gray and black, marked with symbols that meant nothing to Accelerator but everything to the people they were hurting. They carried shock mauls, stub guns. One had a flamer, the pilot light burning blue and hungry. A man was speaking, old, fat, face like spoiled meat. He gestured at the people in the plaza like they were livestock, pointed at 3 children, then 2 more, then an adult. The guards moved forward, grabbed, dragged. The plaza exploded into noise, screaming, begging. One woman lunged forward, hands outstretched toward a child being pulled away. A guard's maul came down. The crack of electricity. The woman collapsed, convulsing. The guards laughed. Accelerator felt the girl's hand close around the back of his shirt. A small grip. Trembling. She was looking at the plaza, at the children being dragged away, at the woman still twitching on the ground. He did not move. The vectors showed him everything. The guards' positions, their weapons, the civilians' heart rates, the structural integrity of the balconies above, the exact force required to collapse the entire plaza into rubble. The calculation was simple. But the girl's hand tightened. One of the children being dragged away was young. Maybe 6, maybe 7. Small enough that the guard carrying her held her by one arm like she weighed nothing. She was screaming. Not words, just sound. Raw, desperate. The guard raised his other hand, balled into a fist. The girl behind Accelerator made a sound, small, broken, like glass cracking. His black wings did not manifest. They did not need to. The vector calculation completed in a fraction of a second. The guard's fist descended. The air around it compressed. The vectors locked, and then reversed. The fist that should have struck the child instead struck the guard's own face with the full force he had intended. Bone shattered. Blood sprayed. The guard dropped, screaming, clutching his ruined face. Silence crashed down on the plaza like a physical weight. Every head turned. Accelerator stood at the edge of the space, the pale girl behind him, and looked at the guards with eyes that had gone completely flat. Empty. The kind of empty that was not absence, but void. The kind that did not reflect light because there was nothing inside to reflect. The guard with the flamer raised his weapon. The pilot light went out. Not extinguished. Inverted. The flame turned inward back down the feed line into the Promethium tanks strapped to the guard's back. The explosion was small, precise, just enough force to rupture the tanks and ignite the fuel. The guard became a pillar of fire. He ran 3 steps before collapsing. The other guards stared. Accelerator took a step forward. The rock crete beneath his foot cracked. Not from weight, from pressure applied from every direction, at once forces that made the stone scream and splinter and turn to powder. Another step. The wind in the plaza changed direction, started flowing toward him. Not pulled, pushed. The air itself recoiling from something it could not understand. The guards broke, ran, not organized, not tactical, just pure animal panic. They scattered into corridors and doorways, and anywhere that was not within sight of the pale figure walking toward them, with vectors coiling around his shoulders like wings, made of mathematics and murder. The civilians remained, frozen, staring. Accelerator walked past them, did not look. The vectors showed him their positions, their heart rates, their fear, but they were not his concern. Were not targets. Were simply obstacles that happened to be made of flesh. The girl followed, still holding his shirt, still silent. They left the plaza behind, the freed children. The woman still twitching. The burning guard whose screams were finally fading into silence. Above them, someone whispered something, a word, a name, or perhaps just a sound that had no meaning but felt right anyway. Demon. The wind carried it down into darkness where Accelerator was already walking, and the shadows closed behind him like a mouth. They came for him in the night. Not that night meant anything in the lower levels. No sun reached this deep. No windows showed the sky. Time was measured by shift changes and the cycling of dim lights that never quite died and never quite lived. But the people here called it night anyway, because some habits were older than cities, older than worlds, older than the Imperium itself. Accelerator sat in the ruins of what had been a habitation block before the ceiling collapsed. The girl slept nearby, curled against a wall covered in a tarp he had pulled from rubble. Her breathing was steady now, regular. The drugs from the soul's siphon rig were working their way out of her system, one toxic molecule at a time. He did not sleep, did not need to. The berserk state had changed something fundamental in how his body operated. Sleep was a function of a brain that needed to process and file away information. His brain no longer worked that way. The vectors did the processing now, constantly, endlessly, showing him everything within a 100-meter radius in perfect detail, even with his eyes closed. Which was how he knew they were coming 47 seconds before they arrived. 32 targets, moving in formation, 3 teams, coordinated, professional. Not the crude guards from the plaza. These were hunters, trained, equipped, dangerous by the standards of anyone who was not him. The Inquisition had regrouped. They entered the habitation block from 3 directions simultaneously: north, east, west. The south wall had collapsed years ago, leaving only open air and a drop into darkness. Smart positioning, limiting escape routes, forcing targets toward kill zones. The vectors painted their equipment in his mind. Psy-cannons, weapons designed to kill things that should not exist. Sonic disruptors, tools for breaking apart molecular bonds through resonance frequencies. And something else. Something stranger. Snipers positioned on the upper levels with rounds that gave off a signature he could not identify. Not kinetic. Not energy. Something that existed partially outside normal space. Spiritual ammunition. The lead team moved first. 6 figures in gray armor marked with symbols that meant purity and pain, and the absolute conviction that anything different must be destroyed. Their formation was perfect. Textbook. 3 covering 3, leapfrogging forward every angle watched. The team leader raised a fist. His squad stopped. He was looking directly at Accelerator. For 3 seconds, neither moved. Then the leader's hand dropped. The Psy cannons opened fire. The rounds were not bullets. They were condensed packets of energy designed to unravel the bonds that held supernatural entities together. Each shot carried enough force to turn a demon into screaming smoke. They crossed the distance between the Inquisition team and Accelerator in less than a second. The vectors caught them, not deflected, not reflected, caught, held, suspended in the air like flies in amber, while Accelerator's ability analyzed them, broke them down, understood the principles that made them work. Interesting. The energy was targeted at psychic signatures, at warp presence, at the resonance frequency of souls that had touched the Imperium and been changed by it. He had no warp presence. The rounds hung in the air. 32 simultaneous shots frozen mid-flight. The Psy cannons began their next volley. Those rounds stopped too, and the next, and the next. The corridor filled with suspended death, hundreds of Psy cannon rounds hovering motionless, their energy dimming as the vectors bled them dry. The Inquisition team stopped firing. Accelerator stood. The girl behind him stirred but did not wake. The vectors showed him the sonic disruptors activating, showed him the frequency they were targeting, showed him the exact wavelength designed to shatter bone and liquefy organs. He adjusted. The sound that filled the corridor was not meant for human ears. It existed at frequencies that bypassed hearing entirely and struck directly at the nervous system. Most people would have died instantly. Their organs would have torn themselves apart from the inside. Accelerator felt it as pressure, annoying, irrelevant. He took a step forward. The suspended Psy cannon rounds moved with him. Not falling, following. A cloud of frozen death orbiting around him like planets around a dying star. The Inquisition team retreated, discipline cracking, training fighting instinct. They had seen impossible things before, had fought demons and psychers and xenobreeds that violated every natural law. But this was different. This was something that took their weapons and made them decorations. The team leader made a decision, reached for something at his belt. The vectors showed Accelerator what it was before the man's fingers closed around it. A melta-charge, small, powerful, designed to generate heat intense enough to vaporize tanks. At this range, it would take out the entire corridor. Structural collapse. Everyone dies. Acceptable losses. The leader's thumb found the trigger. Accelerator was faster. The vectors reached out, not through space, through the man's armor, through the gaps between plates, through the seals designed to keep out poison and radiation and the cold of the void. They found the leader's nervous system. For one instant, every nerve in the man's body fired simultaneously. Every pain receptor, every motor neuron, every signal that told his brain something was catastrophically wrong. He dropped, convulsing. The melta-charge fell from spasming fingers and clattered against the floor. Accelerator's foot touched it. The charge crumbled to powder, molecular bonds unraveling as vectors tore through the casing and neutralized the plasma core. The remaining Inquisition teams broke formation. No longer advancing, no longer tactical, just trying to establish distance between themselves and something they could not categorize. The snipers fired. The spiritual rounds came from 3 directions, designed to pass through normal matter, designed to strike at the soul itself. Blessed, sanctified. Each one had been touched by a saint's relic and whispered over by priests who spent their lives learning how to hurt things that could not be hurt. They struck Accelerator's reflection and ceased to exist. Not deflected, erased. The vectors found the component of the rounds that existed outside normal space and simply deleted it from the equation. What remained was mundane matter, and mundane matter had no chance. One of the snipers made a sound, high, thin, the kind of noise that came from understanding something fundamental about your own mortality. Accelerator looked up. The vectors showed him the sniper nests, showed him the exact position of each shooter, showed him the structural supports holding the upper levels in place. His head tilted slightly. The supports shattered. Not all of them. Just specific ones. Calculated, precise. The kind of engineering that required understanding load-bearing physics down to the molecular level. The upper level did not collapse. It twisted, warped, folded inward like paper, and the sniper nests turned into crushing vices that gave their occupants exactly 1 second to understand what was happening, before geometry stopped being friendly. Silence fell over the habitation block. The Inquisition teams were gone. Not dead. Fled. The few who remained were the ones too injured to move, lying in corridors, breathing through broken ribs, trying to understand what had just happened. Accelerator stood in the center of the room, surrounded by hundreds of still suspended cannon rounds that glowed faintly in the dim light. His expression had not changed. His posture had not shifted. He looked like someone waiting for a train. Bored, patient. The girl was awake now, sitting up, watching him with eyes that were too calm for what she had just witnessed. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, not trying to hide. A figure emerged from the eastern corridor, tall, thin, dressed in robes that might have been white once but were now the color of old bone. An interrogator, young, maybe 30, face marked with ritual scars that formed words in a language Accelerator did not know. The man stopped at the edge of the room, looked at the suspended rounds, at the twisted upper level, at the broken Inquisition soldiers scattered like discarded toys. He looked at Accelerator. His hand moved slowly to his belt. Drew something. Not a weapon, a Vox transmitter. He spoke. His voice was calm, clinical, the voice of someone reporting data, not experiencing fear. Entity X null confirmed. Conventional weapons ineffective. Psy-cannon ammunition ineffective. Sonic disruption ineffective. Spiritual rounds ineffective. Requesting immediate tactical reassessment and deployment of extreme measures. He paused, listened to something in his ear. Understood. Deploying asset containment protocol. Target's companion appears to be key vulnerability. Recommend exploitation. The interrogator looked at the girl. Accelerator's eyes narrowed a fraction. The interrogator's hand moved. Fast, professional. A device appeared. Small, disc-shaped. He threw it. Not at Accelerator, at the girl. The vectors could have stopped it, could have crushed it, could have erased it from existence before it traveled a meter. But it was already activating, already releasing something. Not energy, not matter, sound. A frequency so precise, it did only one thing. Called for help. The girl screamed, not pain, recognition. The sound of someone hearing a voice they had tried very hard to forget. She scrambled backward, eyes wide, hands over her ears. From the corridors, more footsteps. Heavy. Mechanical. The grinding march of something that had been human once and was now more machine than meat. Servitors. Dozens of them. All modified with the same augmetics, all carrying the same equipment, child restraint harnesses. Accelerator looked at the interrogator. The vectors painted a picture of what would happen next. The servitors would grab the girl, would drag her away while he was occupied, would use her as bait, as leverage, as the one thing that could make him follow instead of fight. The interrogator met his gaze, smiled, a thin, cold expression that had nothing to do with humor. Your move, anomaly. For the first time since entering the hive, Accelerator spoke. His voice was quiet, flat. The words were English, but they carried something underneath. A resonance, a frequency, the ghost of lingua angelica that made the air vibrate wrong. Return her. 2 words, that was all. The interrogator's smile widened. He turned, began walking back toward his corridor. Behind him, the servitors advanced on the girl. Accelerator vanished. Not movement, displacement. The vectors compressed space around him and expanded it in front, and the distance between him and the first servitor ceased to be meaningful. His hand touched the servitor's chest. The machine man's torso exploded, not outward, inward. Every piece of metal and flesh and circuitry compressed into a sphere the size of a marble that fell to the ground and rolled into the darkness. The other servitors did not stop, could not. Their programming did not include concepts like fear or retreat. Accelerator moved through them like wind through paper. Each touch was death. Each step left destruction. Servitors collapsed in geometric patterns, their bodies failing in ways that defied biology and engineering simultaneously. The girl remained untouched, protected by vectors that flowed around her like water, keeping the chaos at bay. The interrogator was running now, dignity forgotten, training forgotten, just pure survival instinct. He made it 15 meters before the corridor ahead of him collapsed. Behind him collapsed. To his left, to his right. A box, sealed, inescapable. Accelerator appeared in front of him, not walking, just there. The vectors had stopped caring about the intermediary steps. The interrogator backed against the wall. His hand went to his belt, found a last pistol, drew it, fired. The beam bent, struck the wall next to Accelerator's head. Melted rockcrete, but nothing else. Accelerator reached forward. His hand closed around the interrogator's Vox transmitter, crushed it to powder between his fingers. Then he spoke again. Same quiet voice, same flat tone. But this time, every word carried weight. Every syllable pressed down on the interrogator like gravity had decided to focus all its attention on one man. Tell them. Whatever they plan, whatever they want, it will not work. This is the only warning. He released the transmitter dust, let it fall, turned, walked back to where the girl waited. Behind him, the interrogator slid down the wall, breathing hard, staring at his hands at the space where Accelerator had been trying to reconcile what his training told him should be possible with what he had just witnessed. Accelerator reached the girl. She looked up at him. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, but she was not crying now. She stood, took his hand. They walked into the darkness together, leaving behind the wreckage and the broken soldiers and the interrogator, who would spend the rest of his life wondering if monsters were real, or if he had simply encountered something far worse. Something that used to be human. Something that had forgotten how. The signal was perfect. Too perfect. Accelerator felt it before he understood what it was. A pulse. A electromagnetic, repeating at intervals of exactly 3.7 seconds. Broadcasting from somewhere deep in the hive's industrial sector. Not random, not natural. A beacon. Bait. The girl felt it too. She pressed closer to him as they walked her hand tight around two of his fingers. Her eyes darted to shadows that held nothing to sounds that existed only in her head. The soul siphon rig had left marks deeper than scars. Had taught her that machinery could reach into skulls and take things that should not be takeable. The beacon pulsed again. This time the vectors carried something else with it. Not just electromagnetic radiation. Data, compressed, encrypted. But encryption was just mathematics, and mathematics was something Accelerator understood better than breathing. The data unpacked in his mind. Asset retrieval protocol active. Entity Exa null designated as Imperial property under Mechanicus Covenant 7 Theta. All resistance will be met with maximum prejudice. Compliance is mandatory. Refusal is heresy. He stopped walking. The girl looked up at him, waited. Accelerator's head tilted slightly. The vectors painted a map in his mind. The industrial sector, 12 kilometers northeast, through territories controlled by 3 different gang factions, past a Promethium refinery that was leaking toxic gas across a transit hub where people were packed so tight that structural collapse was a question of when, not if. And at the center, a Mechanicus facility. The beacon pulsed again, louder, more insistent. Not just bait. A summons. They think they own me. The thought drifted through the 20% of his consciousness that was still capable of abstract reasoning. They think I'm salvage. The girl tugged his hand, looked at him with eyes that said she understood. That whatever was sending that signal was the same kind of machinery that had strapped her to a chair and tried to drink her mind like wine. Accelerator looked down at her. Then he started walking. Northeast, toward the beacon. The industrial sector was different from the habitation levels. Cleaner in the sense that the dirt was more organized. The corridors were wider built to accommodate servitors and cargo haulers, and the massive components that kept the hive's infrastructure from collapsing. The air was thick with machine oil and ozone and the smell of heated metal. Everything hummed. Constant vibration. The city's heartbeat. Generators churning. Manufactorums stamping out parts that would be assembled into products no one here would ever see or use. The rhythm was hypnotic. Purposeful. The sound of a world that had decided efficiency mattered more than humanity. They encountered the first patrol 3 kilometers in. Skitari, Mechanicus soldiers. Not fully human, not fully machine. Something in between that had given up trying to decide which was superior. They moved in formation, their augmetic legs creating perfect synchronization, their weapons tracking in patterns that would have made a combat algorithm proud. They saw Accelerator. Did not hesitate. Did not demand identification. Just opened fire. Last rounds. Dozens of them. Coordinated. Every angle covered. Every escape route accounted for. The vectors caught the shots. Held them. Released them back along their original trajectories at twice the velocity. The Skitarii armor was good. Military grade. Designed to withstand frontline combat. It was not designed to withstand its own weapons moving at relativistic speeds. The squad leader's head vaporized. The lost round that had been aimed at Accelerator's chest punched through the Skitari's helmet and kept going until it carved a hole through the wall behind him. The other Skitari fell in sequence. Precise. Efficient. Their own weapons turned against them with mathematical certainty. Accelerator walked past the smoking bodies. Did not look down. The vectors told him they were offline. That was all that mattered. The girl followed. She looked at the Scutarii, at their twisted limbs and shattered armor. Her expression did not change. Whatever capacity she had for horror had been used up long before she met him. They continued deeper. The facility appeared gradually, first as reinforced walls, then as security checkpoints that had been abandoned in a hurry, then as the massive blast doors that marked the transition from hive infrastructure to Mechanicus domain. The doors were open, waiting. Accelerator stopped in front of them. The vectors painted what lay beyond. A massive chamber, 300 meters across, filled with machinery that had no obvious purpose. Gantries, cables, platforms suspended over drops that went down so far the bottom was theoretical. And in the center, a figure, tall, robed in red. More machine than man. Augmetics covered every visible surface. Mechadendrites writhed from his back like metal tentacles. His face was a mask of brass and glass lenses whirring as they focused. Magos Kronsha. The beacon pulse originated from him, from a device implanted in his chest that broadcast at frequencies designed to attract technology to summon lost machinery back to its rightful owners. The Magos spoke. His voice was synthesized, perfect diction, no emotion, pure information transfer. Entity X null. You will submit to analysis. You will submit to categorization. You will submit to Imperial control. Resistance is inefficient. Compliance will be rewarded with continued function. Accelerator said nothing. The girl's hand tightened around his fingers. Kronsha's mechadendrites spread wide. Behind him, the machinery activated. Castellan robots. 6 of them, each 3 meters tall, each capable of punching through tank armor. They stepped forward in perfect synchronization, their weapons powering up with sounds like God's heartbeat. More Scutarii emerged from gantries above. Dozens, all aimed down, all locked onto Accelerator's position. The Magos tilted his head, lenses focusing. You are Imperial property, lost during transit, now recovered. Your vector manipulation ability represents technology that predates current Mechanicus understanding. You will be disassembled, studied, replicated. This is not negotiable. Accelerator looked at the Magos, then at the Castellan robots, then at the machinery surrounding them. The vectors painted a picture, showed him every structural support, every power conduit, every weakness in the facility's design that the Mechanicus had thought were acceptable trade-offs for functionality. They were wrong. The girl spoke for the first time since waking. Her voice was small, broken, but clear. Don't let them take me back. Accelerator's eyes went flat. The Castellan robots charged. Each step shook the floor, each movement calculated for maximum efficiency. Their weapons locked onto Accelerator's position tracking algorithm, compensating for his expected movement patterns. He did not move. The first Castellan reached him, raised a fist the size of a small car, brought it down with enough force to crater rockcrete. The fist stopped. Not caught, not blocked. Simply stopped. Like it had struck an invisible wall that existed in more dimensions than the robot its sensors could register. Accelerator's hand came up, touched the robot's chassis. The Castellan began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster. The vectors found its center of mass, found the axis it was balanced on, and simply twisted. Metal screamed. Joints that had been engineered to withstand artillery fire tore like paper. The Castellan completed a full rotation before its torso separated from its legs in a spray of oil and sparks. The other 5 robots opened fire. Projectiles, energy weapons, missiles, everything they had. Enough firepower to level a city block. The vectors caught it all, analyzed, redistributed. Every shot that had been aimed at Accelerator found a new target. The Skitarii on the gantries, the power conduits, the structural supports, the machinery that Kron Shah had thought was safely positioned out of the combat zone. The facility began to collapse. Not everywhere, not random. Specific points, calculated failure points that would cause a cascade. The kind of engineering disaster that safety protocols were designed to prevent and that required someone who understood structural physics better than the people who built the facility. A gantry collapsed. Skitarii fell screaming into darkness. A power conduit ruptured. Electricity arced across the chamber found a Castellan overloaded its systems. The robots seized, sparked, exploded. Kron Shah's lenses focused on Accelerator, whirring, trying to process what was happening. Impossible. The synthesized voice said, "Your vector manipulation is localized, cannot affect systems at this range, cannot cause simultaneous cascade failure across multiple isolated systems. This violates all known parameters of your ability." Accelerator took a step forward. A support pillar 300 meters away twisted, collapsed. Took out 2 more Castellan robots in the falling debris. "Your data," Kron Shah said, "is incomplete." Another step. The remaining Skitarii opened fire. Coordinated barrage, every weapon at maximum output. Accelerator walked through it. The last rounds bent around him. The projectiles reversed course. The missiles found new targets with perfect accuracy. He reached the Magos. Kron Shah's mechadendrites lashed out. Fast. Tipped with monomolecular blades, each one capable of cutting through ceramite. The vectors caught them, held them, and then compressed. The mechadendrites crumpled like aluminum foil. The monomolecular edges shattered. Kron Shah staggered his augmetic balance systems, failing to compensate for the sudden loss of equilibrium. Accelerator's hand reached toward the Magos' chest, toward the beacon device. "You wanted to study vector manipulation," he said. His voice was quiet, empty. "Here is your data." His fingers touched the device. Every augmetic in Kron Shah's body activated simultaneously. Not in sequence, not controlled, just raw activation. His mechadendrites thrashed. His optical implants overloaded. His respiratory augmetics tried to breathe and exhale at the same time. The Magos collapsed, sparking, twitching. His synthesized voice degrading into static and binary screeches that might have been screaming if machines could scream. Accelerator turned away, found the girl in the chaos. She was pressed against a wall, hands over her ears, watching the facility tear itself apart. He walked to her, extended his hand. She took it. Above them, the remaining gantries began to fall. The machinery that had been Kron Shah's pride was eating itself, systems cascading into failure as the vectors propagated through the facility like a virus made of mathematics. They walked toward the exit. Behind them, the last Castellan robot toppled. Its impact triggered the final collapse. The chamber's ceiling cracked, groaned, gave way. Accelerator wrapped the girl in vectors. A cocoon. Protection. They stepped through the blast doors as the entire facility folded inward like a dying star. The sound was immense, catastrophic. The kind of noise that made bones vibrate and teeth ache. Then silence. They stood in the corridor outside. The blast doors were twisted, sealed. Nothing was coming out of that facility. Not for years. Maybe not ever. The girl looked up at him, released his hand, stood on her own. For the first time since he had found her, she almost smiled. Behind them, buried under 1,000 tons of rubble and ruined machinery, Magos Kronshah's last functioning optical sensor watched the dust settle and wondered if heresy was simply another word for evolution. The beacon's death scream echoed through the industrial sector for hours. Not a sound. A signal. The electromagnetic equivalent of a dying animal broadcasting its location to every predator within range. Kronshah's facility collapsing had triggered fail-safe's emergency protocols, distress calls that propagated through the Mechanicus network like ripples on water. They came. Not immediately. Not in the panicked rush of the Inquisition or the methodical hunt of the Scutarii. The Mechanicus did not panic, did not rush. They calculated, analyzed, determined the optimal response to losing one of their magi and an entire research facility. The answer was overwhelming force. Accelerator felt them long before they arrived. The vectors painted their approach in his mind, machinery. Dozens of pieces, heavy, moving in formation, not combat units. Something else. Something that carried the weight of purpose rather than aggression. Retrieval teams. The girl sensed it too. She had been walking without holding his hand for the last hour, maintaining distance testing independence. Now she pressed close again. Her breathing quickened. They stood in what had been a transit corridor. Wide enough for cargo haulers, the walls were lined with pipes, some of which leaked steam that smelled of chemicals and rust. Ahead, the corridor opened into something larger. The vectors showed him the space beyond. Massive. Industrial. Heat signatures everywhere. A foundry. The Mechanicus forces entered from multiple access points, not soldiers. Tech priests, servitors, and something else. Something that walked on 4 legs and stood 3 stories tall and carried equipment that hummed with barely restrained energy. Dune crawlers. Scout walkers. Equipped with neutron lasers and Cognis-heavy stubbers and the kind of targeting systems that could track a fly at a kilometer. They were not here to kill. They were here to recover. The lead tech priest's voice boomed through vox speakers mounted on the dune crawlers. Synthesized. Emotionless. But carrying an undertone of something that might have been anger, if machines could be angry. Entity X Null. Magos Kronshah was inefficient in his approach. We will not repeat his mistakes. You will be rendered unconscious through application of electromagnetic pulse. You will be transported to Forge Cathedral Tertius. You will be processed. Resistance will result in permanent cessation of function. Accelerator did not respond. The tech priest's lenses focused, adjusted. Civilian asset designated as leverage has been identified. Retrieval of both entities is now priority alpha. Deploy containment procedures. The servitors moved first. 40 of them, modified for heavy industry. Their arms ended in clamps and welding torches and tools designed to shape metal that would break normal hands. They advanced in perfect formation toward the girl. She looked up at Accelerator. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, with recognition. She had seen this before. In the black ship, in Kronshah's facility. Machinery coming to take her, to strap her down, to make her into a resource. Accelerator's eyes went completely flat. The servitors reached the threshold between corridor and foundry, and stopped. not by choice. They simply ceased moving forward. Their augmetic legs churned, their servo motors strained. But the vectors had locked onto every joint, every gear, every point of articulation, and created resistance that increased exponentially with every centimeter of attempted movement. One servitor's leg tore free from its torso, another collapsed as its spine shattered under the strain. A third simply stopped smoke rising from burned-out motors. The tech priest's vox crackled, processing, recalculating. The dune crawlers opened fire. Neutron lasers. Weapons designed to cook targets from the inside by accelerating atomic decay. The beams crossed the distance in nanoseconds, struck Accelerator's reflection, and scattered. Not reflected, not absorbed, scattered. The vectors found the coherent energy and introduced chaos. Each beam split into 1,000 smaller beams that shot off in random directions, carving black lines across walls and ceiling and floor. One stray beam struck a pipe. Superheated metal exploded. Steam erupted in a geyser that filled half the corridor. Through the steam Accelerator walked. The girl followed. They entered the foundry. It was hell rendered in iron and fire. The space stretched hundreds of meters in every direction. The ceiling was lost in smoke and darkness. The floor was a maze of machinery, furnaces, presses, assembly lines that moved with mechanical precision. And everywhere heat, the kind that made the air shimmer, that turned breath into steam, that cooked exposed skin if you stood too close for too long. Molten metal flowed through channels carved into the floor. Rivers of liquid iron glowing orange and white. The heat from them was intense enough that the vectors had to actively work to keep Accelerator's body temperature stable. The Mechanicus forces spread out, surrounding, cutting off exits. The dune crawlers took positions on raised platforms, their weapons tracking. Servitors clustered near the machinery, ready to use the environment as a weapon. The tech priest descended from a gantry on a platform suspended by chains. His robes were pristine red. His augmetics were newer than Kron Shah's, more refined, less cobbled-together experimentation and more assembly line efficiency. He looked at Accelerator, at the girl. His synthesized voice filled the foundry. You are wasting Imperial resources. You are disrupting optimal function. You are refusing to accept your designation. This is heresy against the machine god. This is violation of the covenant. This will end now. He raised a hand. The foundry activated. Not the machinery that was already running. Everything, every furnace, every press, every assembly line, every piece of equipment that had been idle. The foundry was not just a factory, it was a weapon. Built to process raw materials, built to shape metal, built to apply forces that could crush and melt and reshape anything fed into it. The Mechanicus had decided to feed Accelerator into it. The floor beneath his feet began to move. Conveyor systems activating, trying to pull him toward the nearest press. A machine designed to stamp out hull plating for starships, capable of applying thousands of tons of pressure. The vectors locked his position. The conveyor ground against his feet. Sparks flew. The mechanism seized. Smoke rose from burned-out motors. The tech priest's lenses adjusted, recalculating again. Plasma cutters emerged from the walls, industrial equipment, meant for slicing through bulkheads. They activated simultaneously, beams of superheated matter hot enough to vaporize steel. The vectors caught them, analyzed the plasma's composition, its temperature, its trajectory, and reversed it. The plasma cutters turned on themselves. Metal housings melted. The beams died in cascades of sparks and dripping slag. A dune crawler fired, not at Accelerator, at the machinery around him, trying to cause a collapse, trying to bring the foundry down on top of him. The vectors painted the trajectory, showed him where the shot would land, showed him the chain reaction it would cause. He adjusted. The neutron beam struck a support column. The column did not collapse. It twisted, 90 degrees. The beam reflected off the suddenly angled surface and carved through 3 dune crawlers in sequence before dissipating into a furnace. The tech priest's vox emitted something that might have been static, or might have been the machine equivalent of shock. Accelerator took a step forward. The floor cracked, not from weight, from pressure applied in patterns that ignored how materials were supposed to behave. The rockcrete split along lines that formed geometric patterns, fractals, each crack propagating into more cracks in a cascade of controlled destruction. Another step. The nearest furnace's containment failed. Molten metal spilled out, not randomly, in a directed flow. The vectors had found the weak points in the furnace's structure and applied just enough force to create a controlled breach. The metal flowed toward the Mechanicus forces, toward the servitors, toward the dune crawlers. They tried to move, to retreat, to establish new positions. The metal was faster. A servitor's legs were engulfed. The machine man toppled, sank. The molten iron consumed it in seconds. A dune crawler tried to step over the flow. Its leg touched the metal. The heat conducted through armor that had been rated for void operations. Internal systems fried. The walker collapsed. The tech priest was speaking rapidly now. Not Vox broadcasts. Direct communication with the remaining forces. Orders, contingencies, last-ditch protocols. The girl screamed. Not fear, warning. Accelerator's head turned. Behind them, from the corridor they had entered through, more Mechanicus forces. These were different, heavier, moving with the purpose of last options. Castellan robots, a dozen of them. And behind them, something larger. An onager dune crawler, the heavy variant. Equipped with an Icarus array and a neutron laser that was twice the size of the smaller walkers. The tech priest's vox crackled. Final option deployed. The onager's neutron laser powered up. The sound was like a god clearing its throat. Energy built in the focusing array, enough to vaporize a fortress wall. It fired. The beam crossed the foundry in an instant. Struck Accelerator's reflection. The vectors caught it, held it. But this was different. This was not a weapon meant to kill infantry. This was anti-armor, anti-fortification. The energy density was obscene. For the first time since entering the hive, Accelerator's reflection strained. The beam did not penetrate, did not touch him, but the effort of holding it cost. Energy, focus, calculation cycles that could have been used elsewhere. The tech priest saw it, analyzed it, understood. The remaining dune crawlers opened fire. All of them. Every weapon. Neutron lasers, heavy stubbers, everything. Accelerator's reflection held, but it was occupied, fully committed to managing the incoming fire, which meant it could not protect everything. The servitors lunged for the girl. She backed away, hands up, eyes wide. One servitor's clamp closed around her arm. Something in Accelerator's chest went very cold. The berserk state that had been settled dormant, waiting, erupted. His black wings manifested. Not metaphorical, not invisible, physical, real. They tore through the space behind him like the universe had decided to open a wound. black, wrong, made of something that was not matter and not energy and not anything that should exist in three-dimensional space. The wings spread. The onagers' neutron lasers struck them and ceased to exist. Not reflected, not absorbed, erased. The beam simply stopped being. The energy was deleted from reality. The other dune crawlers' fire met the same fate. Rounds, beams, everything. It touched the black wings and was removed from the equation. Accelerator turned toward the servitors holding the girl. The wings moved. They did not swing, did not strike. They simply were in a different position, and everything between the old position and the new position stopped being. The servitors, the Castellan robots behind them, the onager dune crawler, a section of the foundry wall, gone, not destroyed, not vaporized, just absent, like reality had decided that space was more important than the matter occupying it. The tech priest's vox emitted a sound, high, sustained, the machine equivalent of screaming. Accelerator walked toward him. Each step made the foundry shake, not from impact, from the black wings disturbing the fundamental forces that held matter together. The tech priest backed away, his augmetic legs moving faster than optimal, than efficient. Pure survival instinct overriding programming. Impossible, the synthesized voice said. You are not warp, not demon, not xenotech. What are you? Accelerator reached him. His hand touched the tech priest's chest. Every augmetic in the Mechanicus forces activated and then deactivated in rapid sequence. On, off, faster and faster until the cycling destroyed the mechanisms. Servitors collapsed, dune crawlers seized. The remaining tech priests fell as their respiratory augmetics stopped working. The foundry's machinery followed. Every piece of equipment, every system. The vectors propagated through the entire facility like a plague made of mathematics. Furnaces shut down, presses jammed, assembly lines ground to a halt. And then the structure itself began to fail. Load-bearing columns, support beams, the framework that held the foundry together. The vectors found every weak point, every stress fracture, every place where the engineers had accepted a calculated risk. Those risks came due. A support column crumpled. The gantry it held collapsed, fell into a furnace. The impact ruptured the furnace's containment. Molten metal exploded outward. The chain reaction accelerated. Accelerator turned, found the girl. She was pressed against a wall, staring at him, at his black wings, at the destruction spreading like infection through the foundry. He walked to her. The wings folded around them both, a cocoon. The foundry collapsed. The sound was apocalyptic, metal screaming, stone shattering, the roar of thousands of tons of machinery falling into molten rivers, explosions as pressurized systems ruptured, the death cry of something that had been built to last millennia and was dying in minutes. Through it all, the black wings held, protected, created a sphere of perfect stillness in the center of chaos. When the sound finally stopped, when the dust began to settle, Accelerator's wings retracted. They stood in a crater. The foundry was gone. Not damaged. Gone. Reduced to rubble and twisted metal and rivers of cooling iron that would take days to solidify. Around them, the crater stretched for hundreds of meters. The destruction had spread beyond the foundry, into adjacent facilities, into corridors, into entire sections of the industrial sector. Above, through the smoke and dust, people were gathering. Hive residents, workers, gang members. They looked down at the crater, at the figure standing in the center, with the pale girl beside him, at the demon with black wings, who had just torn apart a Mechanicus forge like it was made of paper. Accelerator looked up at them. His eyes were empty. His face was expressionless. His wings folded back into nothing. He took the girl's hand and walked into the darkness, leaving behind a scar on the hive that would be visible from orbit and a legend that would be whispered in the lower levels for generations. The pale demon, the thing that destroyed armies, the monster that protected a single child. The voices started 3 hours after the foundry fell. Quiet at first, barely perceptible, like static at the edge of hearing. Accelerator walked through the lower levels with the girl beside him, and the whispers followed. Not sound. Something else. Something that bypassed ears entirely and spoke directly into the spaces between thoughts. Kill. The word was not spoken, was not heard, was simply there, present. Like it had always been part of his internal monologue, and he was only now noticing it. Kill them all. The vectors showed him nothing. No source, no origin point. The whispers existed in dimensions his ability could not map, could not touch, could not analyze. The girl felt it too. She pressed closer to him. Her breathing had changed, faster, shallower. Her eyes darted to shadows that held nothing visible. They walked through a marketplace. If the word could apply to a space where people traded scraps for other scraps. Rusted metal, stale food, water that had been filtered so many times it tasted like the pipes it came through. The merchants watched them pass, silent, their eyes tracking the pale figure and the child who followed him. No one approached. No one spoke. They simply watched with the kind of attention reserved for natural disasters, for things that could not be reasoned with or negotiated with or stopped. The whispers grew louder. You were born to kill, born to destroy, born to make the world scream. Accelerator's head tilted slightly. The vectors painted patterns in his mind. Trajectories, weak points, every person in the marketplace, every structural vulnerability, every way this space could become a tomb in under 3 seconds. The calculations were automatic, instinctive. The berserk state processing threats that did not exist. His black wings twitched, invisible, but present. The vectors showed him their shape, even though his eyes saw nothing. They were restless, hungry, wanting to manifest, wanting to erase. A child ran past them, young, maybe 5, chasing something, a rat, a piece of food. The child's shoulder brushed against Accelerator's leg. The black wings surged. Accelerator stopped them, forced them down, forced them back into whatever space they occupied when not manifested. The effort made his teeth ache, made the vectors in his mind stutter. The child kept running, oblivious. The girl looked up at him. Her eyes were wide. She had felt it. The moment of almost violence, the wings reaching out and being pulled back. Let it happen, the whispers said. Let us give you a world to slaughter. Let us give you purpose. They moved deeper into the hive, away from people, into sections that had been abandoned, corridors where the lights had died years ago and no one bothered to replace them, spaces where the only sound was water dripping and rats moving through walls and the distant groan of settling metal. The girl stopped walking. Accelerator turned, looked at her. She was staring at something. Not ahead, not behind, up. her eyes focused on empty air. He followed her gaze, saw nothing, but the vectors painted a picture anyway. A disturbance. Not matter, not energy, something else. A place where reality was thinner, where the membrane between dimensions had worn through like fabric. A warp rift, small, barely formed, but growing. The vectors showed him the rate of expansion, showed him that in approximately 43 minutes it would be large enough for something to come through. The whispers became words. Yes. Not a word anymore. A presence. Something vast pressing against the thin space. Something that had been watching, waiting, learning. You are ours. The girl backed away from the rift. Her hands covered her ears, even though the whispers came from inside, not outside. Accelerator stood still. The vectors analyzed the rift, measured it, understood it. It was not a door, it was a wound. And like all wounds, it could be made worse. Or closed. The black wings wanted to open it, to reach through, to touch whatever was on the other side and erase it from existence. The hunger was almost overwhelming. The need to destroy something that matched his power. Something that could fight back. He did not move. The rift pulsed, grew. The edges began to stabilize, to solidify. Whatever was coming through was getting closer. The girl's breathing hitched. A small sound. Not quite a sob. Accelerator's eyes narrowed. The black wings folded inward. Not manifesting, not reaching, containing. He focused the vectors, found the edges of the rift, found the places where reality was still intact, where the membrane could be reinforced and pushed, not with force, with precision, with calculation. The vectors applied pressure in patterns designed to close wounds rather than open them, to heal rather than harm. The rift shuddered, resisted. The whispers became screaming. No, you cannot refuse. You are ours. You were made for this. The pressure increased. The vectors worked faster, finding every weak point in the rift's structure and reinforcing it, making reality remember how to be solid. The rift began to close. Whatever was on the other side pushed back, tried to force its way through before the door shut. Accelerator felt it, felt the weight of something ancient and hungry and utterly alien pressing against his ability. His nose began to bleed. The berserk state did not care about limits, did not recognize things like strain or exhaustion or the finite nature of human biology. But the vectors were running calculations beyond what his damaged brain could support. Were processing information at speeds that required more than the 20% he had left. The Misaka network kicked in automatically. Thousands of sisters lending their computation power. The choker on his neck grew warm. Battery life 11 minutes remaining. The rift closed, not slowly, not gradually. It snapped shut like a mouth. The whispers cut off mid-scream. The presence that had been pressing against reality vanished. Silence crashed down. Accelerator swayed, caught himself. The vectors stabilized his balance before he could fall. The girl was staring at him, at the blood running from his nose, at his eyes that had gone slightly unfocused. She moved forward, reached up, touched his hand. The contact grounded him, pulled him back from wherever the vectors had been taking him. He blinked, focused, looked down at her. She did not speak, just held his hand, They stood there in the abandoned corridor while his nose continued to bleed and his choker counted down the minutes until his ability would shut off entirely. Above them, the place where the rift had been showed nothing, just empty air. But the vectors painted shadows, residue, the echo of something that had almost been. Footsteps approached. Multiple, heavy. Accelerator turned. People emerged from the darkness. Not guards, not mechanicus, just people. Hive residents. Dozens of them. Their clothes were rags. Their faces were hollow. But they moved with purpose. The crowd stopped. Stared. One man stepped forward. Old. Spine bent from decades of labor. His eyes were milky with cataracts. But he looked directly at Accelerator anyway. His voice was rough, cracked. The Black Wings. We saw them. Saw what you did to the Forge. Saw you walk through bullets and fire and things that should have killed you. He paused, swallowed. Are you here to destroy us or save us? Accelerator did not answer, did not know how to. The question assumed he had a choice, assumed the Berserk state operated on concepts like morality or purpose or anything beyond pure reaction. The girl's hand tightened around his. The old man waited. The crowd behind him waited. The hive itself seemed to hold its breath. Accelerator looked at them, at their hollow faces, at their broken bodies, at the hope and fear mixing in their eyes. They saw a demon, saw a monster, saw something that had single-handedly destroyed Imperial forces. And they were asking it to care. The Black Wings stirred, restless, still hungry, still wanting to manifest and erase and destroy. He forced them down, turned away, started walking. The girl followed. Behind them, the crowd stood in silence, processing, trying to understand what the pale demon's departure meant, whether it was mercy or indifference, or simply that they were not worth the effort of killing. The old man watched them go, his milky eyes tracking their movement until they disappeared into the darkness. Then he turned to the crowd, spoke words that would spread through the lower levels like wildfire. It protects the child. As long as we don't threaten the child, it won't touch us. The crowd murmured, dispersed, carried the knowledge back to their communities, to the gangs, to the enforcers, to anyone who would listen. Don't touch the pale demon's child. Deep in the abandoned corridors, Accelerator and the girl walked in silence. His nose had stopped bleeding. His choker had cooled. Battery life, 9 minutes remaining. The whispers were gone. But not far. Never far. Above them, in the highest levels of the hive, where the air was clean and the light was bright, Planetary Governor Strexus received a report. Read it. Read it again. An anomaly in the lower levels. Something that had destroyed 3 separate Imperial facilities. Something that resisted classification. That survived weapons designed to kill Q. And worse. The Warp was interested in it. Strexus made a decision. Activated a Vox channel that had not been used in 17 years. Spoke words that would bring down judgment from the stars. In orbit, a ship received the transmission. Changed course. Began descent. A warp rift opened. Not in the hive, above it, in the space between worlds where reality was thin and monsters were born. Something came through. Something that had been watching the pale demon with interest. Something that saw potential. Something that wanted to own it. Demon Prince Varak Toon spread wings that were not wings and looked down at the hive below with eyes that were not eyes and smiled with a mouth that had too many teeth. The hunt was about to begin, and this time the prey was special. This time the prey was worth keeping. The sky tore open at midnight. Not the metaphorical midnight of the lower levels. Real midnight. In the upper hive, where time still meant something. Where clocks still worked and people still pretended the universe followed rules. The warp rift was not small, not subtle. It opened like a wound the size of a cathedral, and through it came something that had been patient for a very long time. Daemon Prince Varak Tun. He was beautiful in the way that poison was beautiful, in the way that a blade catching light was beautiful. His form shifted between states, sometimes bipedal, sometimes not. Wings that were membrane and smoke, skin that was armor and flesh, eyes that numbered anywhere from 2 to 2,000 depending on who was looking. He descended on the central plaza of Hive L42, the space where the governor held public executions, where the ecclesiarchy preached about the God Emperor, where people gathered to pretend they had community. The plaza emptied in seconds, screaming, panic, pure animal terror at something that should not exist. Varak Tun ignored them, lifted his head, tasted the air with senses that had nothing to do with smell. Found what he was looking for. Miles below, in the depths. The pale anomaly. The thing that resisted categorization. The creature that had touched divinity and been burned by it and survived anyway. His smile was all teeth. He spoke. His voice carried through the hive, not through air, through the warp, through the thin spaces where reality wore through. Every person in L42 heard him, every mind, every soul. There you are lost, child of physics. There you are, mongrel of matter. I have watched you break their weapons, watched you close my door. You are fascinating. You are unique. You are mine. In the depths, Accelerator stopped walking. The girl looked up at him, felt the change, the way his posture shifted, the way the vectors around him began to coil tighter. His choker blinked. Battery life, 4 minutes remaining. The voice came again, not from outside, from everywhere. You do not belong to matter. You do not belong to spirit. You belong to the between, to the cracks, to the places where reality forgets itself. You belong to me. Accelerator's head tilted. The vectors painted a picture. The source of the voice, miles above. Something massive, something that registered on his ability as a distortion rather than a presence. Demon. He knew the word, did not know why. The sister's knowledge. Fragments in the Masaka network. Warnings, prayers. Fear compressed into data. The black wings stirred, not restless anymore, eager. Come to me, pale thing. Come and let me show you what you really are. Let me give you what you were always meant to have. Purpose, direction, a world to tear apart. The girl's hand found his, gripped tight. Accelerator looked down at her. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Not of him, of what was above, of what was calling. She shook her head. Small movement, desperate. His eyes narrowed. He started walking, not away, toward, up. They ascended through the hive, through levels that became progressively less broken, less dark, where the walls were cleaner and the air was breathable and people wore clothes that had been manufactured this decade. The residents fled when they saw him coming, scattered like insects. Some tried to hide, some tried to run. All failed to do either quietly. Behind them, a trail of abandoned corridors, empty streets, spaces evacuated in panic. Above, Varak waited, patient, amused. The plaza was empty when they arrived, just the demon prince standing in the center, wings spread, form settling into something approximately humanoid, 8 feet tall, horned, beautiful and terrible and wrong in ways that made eyes hurt to focus on. He looked at Accelerator, at the girl beside him, laughed. The sound was not sound. It was pressure. It made the plaza stones crack, made windows in nearby buildings shatter, made people miles away clutch their heads and scream. So small, so fragile, and yet you carry such weight, such potential. Do you even know what you are? Accelerator did not respond. You are an accident, a mistake, a creature that should not exist in any layer of reality. Your very presence is an insult to physics, to metaphysics, to everything. Varak form shifted, grew, towered. And I will make you glorious. The demon moved, not walking, displacement. One moment at the plaza's edge, the next directly in front of Accelerator. Clawed hand reaching. The vectors caught it, held it, applied force. The claw stopped, inches from Accelerator's face. Varak eyes widened, delighted. Yes, exactly like that. Beautiful. He pulled back, circled, studying. They tried to capture you, to study you, to own you. They failed because they do not understand. You are not a tool. You are not a weapon. You are something else. Another lunge, faster, from 3 directions simultaneously. The vectors responded. 3 separate calculations, 3 separate counters. Each claw deflected, each trajectory reversed. Varak laughed again. You fight like you think, mechanical, mathematical, perfect, but cold, so cold. He gestured. The plaza stones erupted, not up, sideways, in directions that defied geometry. The warp was leaking through him, changing the rules, making reality optional. Accelerator's vectors struggled. The forces were wrong, impossible. They followed laws that did not exist in normal space. A stone struck him, not hard, but it struck. His reflection had missed it. First blood. Varak smile widened. There. You see, you cannot calculate chaos, cannot predict madness. Your precious mathematics break against the warp. He raised both hands. 20,000 images flooded Accelerator's mind. Not images, memories, the sisters, all of them. Every clone he had killed, every face, every moment of death. Every drop of blood on his hands. The weight was crushing. The guilt was infinite. And the berserk state felt nothing. Varak smile faltered. Interesting. You have deleted remorse, erased conscience, made yourself hollow. He looked at the girl, but not completely. The girl screamed, not pain, not yet. But Varak attention was on her now, his presence pressing down, trying to break her mind the way the soul siphon rig had tried, trying to take her apart. Accelerator's black wings manifested, not slowly, not gradually. They exploded into existence, physical, real, made of something that was not dark matter and not warp energy and not anything that belonged in this dimension. The wings spread, 30 feet across, 40, growing. Each feather was a blade that cut reality. Each movement left tears in space that bled darkness. Varak stopped smiling. What are you? Accelerator did not answer, the wings moved. Varrock tried to dodge, tried to shift to warp space, tried to phase out of material reality. The wings followed. They existed in material space, in warp space, in the spaces between. They were omnidimensional. They touched everything everywhere, all at once. One wing brushed Varrock's arm. The arm ceased to exist. Not cut, not removed, simply deleted from every layer of reality simultaneously. The demon prince screamed. Real sound this time. Pain, confusion, fear. He struck back. Warp energy condensed into blades, each one sharp enough to cut through adamantium, through ceramite, through anything mortal. They struck the black wings and shattered. Varrock backed away, form destabilizing. He was beautiful, terrible, ancient. He was losing. Impossible! You cannot hurt me! I am beyond death, beyond physics. I am warp incarnate. The black wings spread wider, began to fold around the demon like a cocoon, like a cage, like a coffin. Varrock's eyes went wide. True fear, the kind that came from understanding. You are not matter, not spirit. You are erasure. The wings closed, layer by layer, dimension by dimension. They touched Varrock's form and removed it from existence. Not killed, not banished, erased, deleted from the equation of reality. The demon prince tried to scream, to beg, to bargain. The wings did not care. 13 layers of demonic existence. 13 parallel forms anchored across warp and material space. The wings found them all, removed them all. When the wings opened again, Varrock was gone. Not dead. Gone. The space where he had been was empty. Clean. Like he had never existed. The plaza was silent. Accelerator swayed. The wings folded, retracted, disappeared. His choker blinked red. Battery life 0 minutes remaining. He fell. Not collapsed, not dramatically, just fell. Knees hitting stone, body following. No calculation ability, no vector control. Just a broken, exhausted body that had pushed beyond limits that should have killed him hours ago. The girl caught him. Barely. She was too small, too weak. But she tried anyway, held him up, kept him from hitting the ground completely. The air above them shimmered. Something else was coming through. Not demon, not human. Something that existed in a state that was neither. Light. Pure. Blinding. Aiwas. The entity manifested. Not fully. Just enough. A hand made of equations. A presence made of higher mathematics. It reached down, touched the space around them. Reality bent. Folded. The plaza was there and then was not. Academy City was not there, and then was. A voice, not spoken, not heard, understood. Return. The transition was instantaneous. No corridor, no journey, just there to hear. The vectors that made Accelerator what he was recognized, something familiar, something that operated on similar principles, something that could fold space like paper. The plaza became a street. The hive became a city. The toxic air became clean. Accelerator blinked, looked up. Blue sky, real sky. Not smoke, not darkness. Actual blue with actual clouds. Academy City. The girl looked around, confused, terrified. This was not her world. Not her reality. But she held on to Accelerator anyway because he was the only thing that made sense. Footsteps, running, a voice, young, familiar, annoyed. What the hell? Accelerator, where have you been? You disappeared for a week, just vanished. We thought... Misaka, worst, stopped, stared, at Accelerator, on his knees, exhausted, blood dried on his face, choker dead, eyes unfocused. At the girl beside him, pale, wearing rags, covered in dirt and scars. At the way the girl was holding Accelerator, like he was the only solid thing in a universe made of smoke. Worst's expression shifted. Anger to confusion to something else. Who's the brat? Accelerator tried to stand, failed. The girl helped, pulled his arm over her shoulder. Supported weight she should not have been able to support. He looked at Worst. His voice was rough, barely audible. Don't know her name? The girl looked up at him, then at Worst. Her voice was small, cracked. The first word she had spoken since the black ship. I don't have one. Worst stared, processed. Looked at Accelerator, at the girl, at the way they stood together. Monster and child. Demon and innocent. She sighed. Ran a hand through her hair. Of course you brought back a stray. That's so stupidly on brand it hurts. She stepped forward, took Accelerator's other arm, helped support him. Come on, let's get you both somewhere with actual medical facilities and food that won't kill you. You look like shit. They walked, slowly, through streets that were clean and bright and full of people who were not starving, who were not being crushed by the weight of cities built on top of cities. The girl looked around, wide-eyed. This was impossible. This was a dream. This was safe, Accelerator said, reading her expression, if not her thoughts. This is safe. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She did not cry. Just let them fall silent while they walked. Behind them, the space where they had arrived shimmered once. Iwas's presence withdrawing. Job complete. Above unseen, unheard, something watched. The sisters. All 20,000. Linked through the Misaka network. They had felt him. Felt the moment he fell. Felt the desperation. Felt him returning. Last Order's voice echoed through the network. Welcome home. Accelerator heard it. Did not respond. Did not need to. He was home. He was exhausted. He was broken. But he was home, and the girl beside him was safe. That was enough. In the lower levels of Hive L42, in a universe away, an old man with milky eyes told a story to anyone who would listen. About a demon with black wings. About a monster that protected a child. About something that destroyed armies and closed warp rifts and vanished like it had never been. The story spread, changed, grew, became legend, became myth. In 1,000 years, people would still whisper about the pale saint, the red demon, the thing that came from nowhere and returned to nowhere and left only destruction and mercy in its wake. But in this moment, in this street in Academy City, under this blue sky, Accelerator was just a broken boy with a broken body helping another broken child learn to stand. And that was all that mattered. The black wings were silent, sleeping, waiting, always waiting. But not today. Today there was just the sun and the sky, and two people who had survived things they should not have survived, walking home, together.